What is up, guys? Bobgar here, and it's time for another episode of $10 Deck, the show where I look at various decks that you can build on Magic Online for about 10 tickets, which is $10 on Magic Online. And today we are going to look at white-blue control. White-blue control is a pretty popular and interesting archetype in Modern. It hasn't done as well lately, but it's pretty sweet, and I thought it would be fun to do a control deck. We've done a whole lot of aggro decks, both creature aggro and burn style decks lately, and it's good to get a little bit of control going, a little bit of a different flavor on the channel. So we're going to be looking at this deck today, and we're going to start with the early counterspells. This deck is all about playing things at instant speed, and the early game is no exception. We're running 4 copies of Censor. A lot of times we'll just be cycling this, but we can force spike people pretty often too, and when we can force spike people, it's very, very good. 3 copies of Negate, counter target non-creature spell. This is pretty good in our deck because almost everybody runs at least some non-creature spells, and we have some sweepers in the deck to cover the creatures and help us get back ahead. So even if we end up with a couple of negates early game, as long as we can find a sweeper, it's more important to counter the non-creature spells early game and then use the sweepers to catch back up. And then 4 copies of Rune Snag. Rune Snag is a little bit like Mana Leak, except it only makes the opponent pay an extra 2 mana, otherwise the spell is countered, but this number gets higher for every copy of Rune Snag in your graveyard. So the first time you cast it, it will be 2 mana. The second time you cast it, it will be 4. Third, it'll be 6, and so on. So it starts as a mana leak, but it gets better as the game progresses and as you cast more of them. So those are kind of the early game counter spells we're going to use to keep our opponents down, try to keep ourselves in the game. We're usually going to be behind on board. We're usually going to get a little behind in the early game, but the hope is that we can eventually stabilize and get back ahead. And these kind of help us keep our opponents from getting out too far ahead of us. And then there's some later game counter spells. Logic Knot, late game. This is the only delve card in the whole deck, and we're going to have a lot of stuff in our graveyard because we run a lot of instants that just go straight to the graveyard after we play them. So we're going to be able to counter for X equals a lot very quickly and keep this up as a 2 mana counter anything at a pretty early point, kind of towards mid game. Early on, we'll obviously want to use those other counters if we can, but Logic Knot is very good. We're only running 1 copy of it. We're also running 3 copies of Cryptic Command. It's a white-blue 4-drop, and it's a choose 2 spell. Usually we'll want to choose counter target creature spell and draw a card, but there will be occasions where we'll either want to draw a card and gain 4 life or counter a creature spell and gain 4 life, especially against particularly aggressive decks. Those are often important, the gaining 4 life that is. We have literally no creatures that cost 2 or less, so that mode will never come up, although it is very strong, and if you're running different versions of this deck, it could be good. Cryptic Command, if you're familiar with blue control decks in general, most decks would want to run Cryptic Command in this slot, but we do not have access to Cryptic Command because it's a little bit expensive, but Cryptic Command does a pretty good job of being like a Cryptic Command on a budget, and it also has the advantage that it's not quite as intensive on the mana to cast, which is nice for this deck because we do have obviously a budget mana base as well. And like I said, the gain 4 life is actually surprisingly useful a lot of the time too. Alright, and then we have a lot of card draw and card smoothing. So Serum Visions and Sleight of Hand are our 1-drops. There's 7 of them total, and they kind of set up the next couple draws in the deck and help us get to the pieces we need at any given point in the game. So, you know, later on in the game, we might be pushing away our censors because they're just not very good anymore, but early on, we might be grabbing them, things like that. To Think Twice, it's basically a draw 2 for 5, but you can split it across turns and play that at instant speed, which is actually pretty nice. Gives you something to do with the deck kind of early and mid game if your opponents aren't casting spells or they know you have Mana Leak up, so they're trying to play around it. I guess not Mana Leak, Rune Snag rather, and they're trying to play around those. So even if they do, you can just play that end of turn. And Pull from Tomorrow is another instant. This is 2 mana, draw X, and this is really good in this deck, especially once you get towards turn like 5 and 6. If you've stabilized a little bit and you can take a turn off of not countering stuff and just Pull from Tomorrow X 4 or 5. You get a million cards, you can probably just discard a land and keep, you know, putting down more mana, having a ton of counter spells in hand, and hopefully you've drawn a couple of the threats in the deck. So in addition to that card draw, we're also running Jace Beleren, which is for us mostly just a card draw spell. Usually we want to use its minus and target ourselves to just draw an extra card. You can also make both you and your opponent draw a card. His ultimate's not very likely to get hit, although decking your opponent isn't that crazy in this deck, I guess. But he's just a nice little kind of 3 mana, draw 3 over the course of a couple turns, and if you stabilize, a lot of times you can get him out, hold up Counterspells, and just slowly draw cards and get advantage off him. So that's what he does in the deck. And then Day of Judgment is super important to the deck. It's what helps us stabilize and get back in the game against decks that run a fair number of creatures. Sometimes they'll be smart enough to not pull out all their creatures because they'll see it coming, but it still just helps us stabilize. And, turn 6 or later where we can do this and still hold up Counterspells, a lot of times we can just kind of start locking our opponent out of the game and executing our own game plan. So that's pretty much everything except for the finishers. So it turns out we do actually need to put in a few cards that have some chance of winning us the game. Otherwise, we'll just, counter our opponent forever and do nothing, and eventually we'll lose somehow. We'll probably just deck ourselves. So these cards help us stay in the game. Aetherling is a 4/5 with a whole lot of abilities. The most important one is he's a 4/5 that can blink himself out until end of turn. He can also make himself unblockable, which is pretty nice. He can also give himself +1 and -1 to repeatedly, so he can make himself nice and big and hit for a lot of damage at once. And he also can give himself -1/+1, which helps him block against some bigger threats and can also help him get under things like Ensnaring Bridge. In fact, with enough mana, you could pump him down to being a 0/9, swing in under an Ensnaring Bridge, and then pump his power back up. Obviously, that would cost a lot of mana to do and is not necessarily where you want to be, but he's a creature with a lot of tools to do things, and he's the only creature in the deck. We run exactly one creature, and we're usually not going to play him at 6. We're usually going to wait till at least turn 7 so he at least has protection to dodge a single removal spell. Sometimes we'll even want to wait till 8 so he can blink himself out both turns, or blink himself out twice in a row if they go kill spell. You try to blink it and they put another kill spell on top of the stack. Basically, we don't have that many threats, so you really want to be protective of the threats that we have. White Sun Zenith is one that used to get played in white-blue control a lot. It's kind of fallen out of favor just because, there's other cards that also do a pretty good job. It is a 3 white mana and then X. Put X 2/2 white cat creature tokens onto the battlefield. Shuffle White Sun Zenith into its owner's library. So, first off, this lets you put a lot of power onto the field pretty quickly, and it lets you do it at instant speed. You're not going to want to play this probably before turn 5 or so, but turn 5 through 10, when you're starting to get a lot of mana, this can help you instant speed, play down a bunch of blockers, and trade with opponents' threats that you didn't even know you were going to be able to do. It can obviously just put down 10 or 12 power worth of guys and swing back in and take your opponent out of the game pretty quickly. A very, very good card as a finisher. It also gets shuffled back out into your library, which means as long as we can cast this, we're not going to deck ourselves. And also, it helps us stay a little bit threat dense if we're starting to run out of our threats, because we can keep recycling this basically. And then the final card here is Approach of the Second Sun. And so Approach of the Second Sun is a new one from Amonkhet, 7 mana, which is really expensive. If it's the second time you've cast it and you cast it from your hand, you win the game. And otherwise, you put Approach to the Second Sun into your library, 7th from the top, and you gain 7 life. And as you can probably imagine, this also combos well with Sleight of Hand and Serum Vision, so we can draw back into it quickly. And then also Pull from Tomorrow. At this point in the game, a lot of times we can go Approach one turn, Pull from Tomorrow, end of turn our next turn, and then Approach again. So if we get this and we have a Pull from Tomorrow, we can close out the game very quickly at that point. And so the reason that we have these 3 different win conditions, only 4 win condition cards total, is to give us some variety against decks that might try to stop various win conditions in particular. Having a creature versus having an instant versus having a win condition that doesn't even require us attacking gives us a lot of variety to get by certain decks. So if they're playing Ensnaring Bridge, which, and they pat the Exile or Aetherling, we didn't have enough mana up to protect it, we can still win with Approach. If they have something like Ghostly Prison, Aetherling is pretty good against attacking in against that, and White Sun Zenith is obviously terrible since it's going to be very expensive to attack with all those tokens at once. So it just gives us a variety of wins to make sure we don't get hosed by anybody in particular. And because we're going to be going through so much of our deck because we have so much card draw, it will be able to find a couple of different win conditions any given game a lot of times and use the one that works best in that scenario. So that's why it's kind of built like this, with this weird kind of selection of random looking win conditions that are all different. But I think it works pretty well. And then the lands, we run 24 lands. So this is a super land heavy deck. 8 islands, 9 plains. It's really kind of more like 11 islands, 9 plains, because we're also running 4 Fairy Conclave, which by the way is also a potential closing threat. But it's only a 2/1 flyer. It takes us a long time to close with just that. I think more often I just end up activating it to block guys and keep us in the game, but still pretty good when we can use it. And then also 4 Nimbus Maze, taps for white or blue. And the nice thing is, if we have white and not blue, in terms of like having plains out but not islands, it'll tap for blue and vice versa. So it kind of gives us the one we need. It's much more important for this deck to have 1 of each mana than 2 of any given mana. That gets a little less true late game as we start looking towards the Wrath and obviously White Sun Zenith, which requires 3 white mana, which is kind of crazy. But at the point where we need 3 white mana, a lot of times we've kind of have a lot of lands at that point, so we'll usually have the 3 white mana. All right, and that's the deck. Time for sideboard. Pretty typical for the first couple. 3 Ghost Quarters. It's a little hard on the mana, but obviously worthwhile against Tron or something like that. And it's also pretty worthwhile against decks that run Cavern of Souls. Our control deck with all the counterspells we run does fold pretty hard to Cavern of Souls. We do have a few things that, you know, we can still do. I mean, like, we can just cycle our Censors, for instance. But yeah, and the Ojutai's Command, we can just gain 4 life, draw a card. But yeah, it hurts a lot if they have Cavern of Souls out. That puts a pretty serious damper on our deck. So against those matchups, we'll probably still bring in Ghost Quarters just to make it so that we can resolve some of our counterspells, as much as that is a little bit painful. 3 Tormod's Crypt against graveyard decks. 2 Dispel, in case we're against another control deck and get into Counter Wars, or just any deck that plays a lot of instants. It makes a lot of sense. 4 Disenchants. Disenchant over the other ones just because we like to hold up counterspells on their turns, and we want to be able to play Disenchant end of turn. So even though it costs an extra mana, the fact that it hits any size artifact or enchantment, and the fact that we can play it end of turn, makes this advantageous over the other ones we would normally run in a deck like this. 1 Echoing Truth, not super useful, but in decks where our opponent is going to put out a huge mass of a single thing, like token decks, Echoing Truth is very good. Or if we just know they're going to play something that we don't have a way to destroy and we just need to bounce, Echoing Truth is very good. So just a one of kind of catch-all emergency card. And then the last couple negates. I think there's actually only 1. I must have done something slightly off here, because I think I moved 1 of the negates to the main board. Anyway, it's fine. So that's what the sideboard looks like, and then this is the entire deck. It ended up being 13 online. It was right around 10, but since 3 days ago when I built it, Serum Vision spiked from $150 to $225 or so, and like something else must have gone up very slightly too. So it ended up pushing it up by $2 or $3. Not a big deal. It is $130 in paper, so this is one of the biggest price disparities, paper to online. There are some places you can probably just cut what we're running online. Like Jace Bellerin is super cheap online, and he's pretty expensive in paper, and you don't really need him. You could just run 2 more Think Twices or something. Anyway, so that's the deck. I wanted to also talk about matchups. I didn't put too much thought into this. I'm not really sure how it does in various matchups. I think Burn is just too fast. It tries to play multiple spells a turn. We do have some life gain in Ojutai's Command, which could keep us in those games. But and obviously Approach to the Second Sun also gains us a lot of life. But I'm a little skeptical about whether we'll be able to stay in against Burn. I have a bad feeling they will just run us over with all the Burn they have. Creature decks, we might have a slightly positive matchup. It is a little hard if they're very, very fast, like the Bushwhacker Zoo style decks that run Burning Tree Emissary and things like that. If they get a good draw, they're just going to run us over. If they're a little bit slower, we'll probably get to our sweepers. And if we get to our sweepers, we have a pretty good shot against those decks. So I can go either way. That's why I put a little tilde by it. Against other control decks, I think we're at a slight disadvantage. Again, I put a tilde just because I think it's pretty close. But we're at a slight disadvantage because Ojutai's Command is very bad against those decks. Mostly they don't run creatures, and their main land is obviously a 4/4 Vigilance, which is much stronger than our 2/1 flyer. So I think they will generally have the advantage there, but I think it'll be pretty close. Tron, I think we have a bad matchup against. Combo, not so much. A lot of combo decks we will be able to counterspell and you know, because they only need to resolve 1 or 2 super important spells, if we have 1 or 2 counter spells up, a lot of times we can just keep them from ever resolving those. So this one's split, but that's partly because I lumped 2 different kinds of decks together. One is big mana, which I think the deck has a huge problem with. I think Tron will beat us almost every time. And the other is combo, and I think for combo, we will probably beat them most of the time, but they're pretty close. And then mid-range, I think we actually have the advantage. They're a little bit slow. We get the chance to get card advantage, and you know they're trying to be slow and grindy, but I think we are slower and grindier. So I think eventually we'll be able to resolve some of our spells. Liliana forcing us to sacrifice a creature doesn't work so well against White Sun Zenith, and I think we can get out ahead of them there and win that matchup. And then finally, I wanted to put a little slide here. I have a lot of suggestions from you guys. I'm going to work through them slowly. Zencyclopedia suggested doing some control decks because we have kind of been on this very tribal aggro set lately where we've been doing a lot of those. And I thought that was a really good idea. And here's a list of all the various requests I have gotten from you that I've managed to write down. I'm keeping a list of them so I don't forget. If your suggestion is not on here, feel free to give me the suggestion and I will add it to the list. If I missed one, I didn't mean to. And yeah. I'm pretty excited both to run some things not on this list and also to run most of the things on this list. I'm very excited to do more ramp. I love ramp. I got 2 people suggesting I run more ramp. I love mill. I don't know if I'll be able to make one actually work, but that would be super fun. Infected and black-white tokens are 2 of my favorite decks. And oh my god, Sundial of the Infinite. It's a little, I don't know if I can make it work. I tried a few different things and I still don't have a deck with it that wins a lot of the time, but it is just such a cool card. So I wasn't sure if Ned Stark's dad was actually suggesting it, or he just wanted to show me the deck he was working on. But Sundial of the Infinite is a pretty awesome card, and I would really like to make a deck with it. But that one's gonna be, I'm gonna have to go deep. That might take me a couple weeks to figure out if I decide to do that one. Anyway, so that's the deck for the week, and that's me talking at the end a little bit about these suggestions, and obviously thanking you all again. Let me know what you think, and I will see you next time. Hey guys, Bobgar here. I just really wanted to quickly say, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you enjoy my content in general and would like to see more of it, subscribe. I'll be coming out with more content in the future. And please leave me comments and let me know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, both in terms of production and in terms of my play and my deck building and all that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time.